Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Dr. David Bernstein. I'm in the Faculty of Psychology and Neuroscience at Maastricht University, and I'm really glad to welcome you to this webinar about staying psychologically fit in Corona times. Now, you probably have noticed a lot of advice, that you can go on the internet and get all kinds of advice about coping with Corona and how you should handle yourself during quarantine. Things like doing sport and structuring your time, working on some self-actualization, finding meaning and purpose in this, new world we're living in, starting a hobby maybe, or spending quality time with people you love. Well, sometimes it can just feel like too much. I mean, really, come on. Here we are living and dealing with difficult things, and we're supposed to now go and do all this stuff. Now, my best advice to you for dealing with the times that we're in is the following. Take it easy. Just do the best that you can under these circumstances. Be kind to yourself. These are tough times. And really the last thing that you need is more expectations. So take a deep breath and, just try to do the best you can on a day-to-day basis. Now, here we are with the famous hierarchy of needs from Abraham Maslow. Now, maybe some of you are familiar with this. If you've taken psychology courses, this is in every single introductory psychology textbook. And what Maslow's pyramid tells us is that we first need to focus on or satisfy the needs in the bottom of the pyramid before we can focus on the needs in the top of the pyramid. So we first need to satisfy our biological needs, like for food and so forth. We need to, and our needs for safety, and then our needs for love and belonging. And only after that can we focus on the needs for esteem and self-actualization. Now, what's very interesting is that not consciously, but unconsciously, our bodies know this. And you may find that certain things that under normal circumstances you're able to do pretty easily feel more difficult in these times, that you may find yourself having more difficulty focusing, that you may experience more unwanted stress. And part of the reason for that is because our bodies and our brains now, whether we realize it or not, want us to focus on our basic needs, our biological needs, our needs for safety, and our needs for connection. And yet, this represents a mismatch between how we are now and how our bodies are now and how they're responding and the world that we normally live in non-corona times. And let me show you what I mean here. Okay, so we talked about Maslow's priority of needs. This is Bernstein's hierarchy of priorities. And let's say that you had to, or somebody asked you a question, how do you prioritize between these three things? Work, family, and health. Well, a student once asked me this, and I very confidently said, well, I put my health first because that's the basis of everything else, and then my family because they're really important to me, and then finally work is in the third place. But I must admit that after she asked me this question, after I went home and I thought about it a little bit, I thought, no, I wasn't being honest with myself. That much of the time I put my work in the first position. And that's a big source of stress in our normal daily lives, that we try to balance somehow our work with family and health, but oftentimes the demands of our performance-oriented society and our own internal demands put work in the first place. And so in Corona times, our bodies and our brains are forcing us to reprioritize. Our bodies and our brains are forcing us to put our health in the first position. And then family, because that's our sense of belonging and connection, and putting work in the third place. That's a major adjustment that we are making on an individual basis and that our society is having to grapple with in these very different times that we're living in. What happens when you ignore Bernstein's hierarchy? I want to show you a video clip and you're going to see a good example. And hopefully, oh, wait a minute, it didn't work. Tell you what this is. This is the Dutch Parliament. And this is one of our politicians, Geert Wilders, who was essentially questioning the Dutch Minister of Health a few weeks ago. And in the middle of Geert Wilders' question, look what happened.
De apparaten, de beademingsapparatuur, dat die minister alles moet doen om te zorgen dat er voldoende is. Mijn vraag aan hem is, weet hij hoeveel is voldoende? Dat is mijn eerste vraag. Mijn tweede vraag is...
Ik schors de vergadering.
What happened here is that the Minister of Health fainted. He fainted in the middle of the Dutch Parliament a few weeks ago. Now, afterward, he was questioned about what happened. His name is Bruno Bruins, and he said that he was exhausted from weeks of intense work working on this health crisis. And you can really feel for him. But here's a good example of how if you don't pay attention to your body, at a certain point, you're going to experience overload and a kind of shutdown. So don't ignore Bernstein's hierarchy. You know, no matter what the pile of work that you have or what your internal standards are, if you need to pay attention to your body right now and to those basic biological needs and listen to what your body is telling you. Now, okay, so here we are in these very, very different times that we're living in. And yet, you know, what's interesting about that is that these times, even though they are unprecedented in our lifetime, are actually have some similarities to other times that humankind has gone through. And in all of those periods, humanity somehow has been able to get through, you know, all of these previous challenges, waves of adversity, you know, pandemics, other kinds of things. So for example, you know, the Spanish flu in 1918, you may have heard, you know, maybe killed up to 50 million people. The Great Plague of London in 1665 is very interesting. If you look at, you know, Shakespeare's plays at the Globe Theatre, in that year, 70% of those performances had to be canceled because of the Great Plague. So, you know, we're not the only ones experiencing this kind of thing. You know, the Black Plague of 1347. You can even go further back to the 10 plagues of Egypt. Now, you know, those are in the Bible, and you might think, well, that didn't really happen. We don't know if it really happened or not. But there are some scientists who point to the fact that in 1620 BCE, there was an enormous volcanic eruption in the island of Santorini, which is in present-day Greece, and that this may have caused some of the plagues that are described in the Bible. So we can look back at all of these periods and see how people coped. But you know what? We can even go back further. We can even go back to the Ice Age. As you probably know, there have been several ice ages, and the most recent one ended in around 13,000 BCE. And at that time, as you know, because of, you know, the extremely cold temperatures that humanity was dealing with, it led to some pretty big changes in people's lifestyles. Now, here are some artists' depiction of what life might have looked like during the last ice age. And as you see, it doesn't actually look that bad. I mean, if you look at the cave there on the left, you know, they have lots of room, they're cooking, somebody seems to be going out to go and maybe hunt, they got a little childcare going on there, and all of this incredible cave art is being produced, you know, which we can now see today in some of these caves in southern France and other places. Now, what's very interesting to think about is that even though those conditions look so different than the kinds of conditions that, you know, we are facing today, that humanity in that period, that human beings then were the same as they are now. That the people, Homo sapiens living 15,000 years ago were identical to the way we are now. They were identical physically, they were identical psychologically, they were identical emotionally. Now that's fascinating to think about. So how did they cope? Well, the picture on the right with the cave painting gives one potential answer. Now, I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to ever see any of these cave paintings live, and I certainly hope that when you have the opportunity after these Corona times are over, that you visit some of them. Because what's remarkable when you see these things live is that these paintings could have been created by modern people. They are detailed and beautiful, and they clearly have something to do with the spiritual beliefs of the people involved. And so perhaps one of the ways that people were coping, even back in those days, was by finding some kind of meaning in their experience. Okay. Now, following on the metaphor of, what can we learn from, our ancestors from the Ice Age? We can ask the question, here you're going through quarantine, and amazingly enough, at this time, about half of the world's population is in some form of quarantine. I'm talking about 4 billion people. You can ask yourself, what do you need in your cave? What do you need in your cave right now? Wherever your cave is, whatever your cave is, what do you need in your cave in order to be able to survive and to thrive the best you can? And here's a cartoon. You see these two hermits, and they're talking with each other, and one of them has a laptop, and they're off there obviously in the middle of the desert or something, and one of them has come out of his cave, and he's sitting there on a rock, and he says to the other one, "That's what I love about social media. I can have connections with thousands of people and yet still be completely isolated and alone." And isn't that a fitting statement for our situation now? On the one hand, we're quite isolated, and at the same time, we have this world of infinite connections through social media. Now, here is a modern cave dweller, Scott Kelly. Scott Kelly is an astronaut, and he spent a year on the International Space Station. And he wrote really a terrific piece in the New York Times on March the 21st, where he was able to try to give some tips, some advice based on his experiences of being there, isolated with a small crew in the International Space Station for a whole year. And how was he able to get along, and how was he able to manage, and what helped him? If you haven't already, I really recommend you read this article. One of the things he said is follow a schedule. And what he said was that, in quarantine or in his situation, every day seems to blend into another one. And it's also very easy to get out of our natural rhythms. And what's the reason for that? Many of us depend on external structure in order to manage our daily rhythms. The structure of getting up in the morning and going to work or going to school, or coming back in the evening, or whatever it is that we do. So he said, put together a schedule for yourself and follow it. But he also said, pace yourself. And that's one of the interesting things, because apparently he experienced some of the stresses there in that environment. Even though he's an astronaut and obviously a super resilient guy, he experienced some of the stresses that we're experiencing. So he said, pay attention to your body, take time to do fun things. It's not the same as living in normal circumstances. He also said, go outside. And, what does that mean in his case? Well, taking a spacewalk. But it also said, he talked about bringing the outside inside. So, for example, he created a small garden. And he said that garden just helped to soothe and calm him. And there is research showing, actually, that nature and exposure to nature will soothe and calm us. So that's a very nice, easy thing that you can do to reduce your stress response. He also mentioned having a hobby, and you might think, okay, an astronaut, he's going to have some, really cool and really sophisticated hobbies. Well, it turns out his hobby was watching, binge watching Game of Thrones. That was his hobby. But okay, so it suggests that you don't have to do something really, really fancy in order to, perhaps manage a little bit better, in the situation of quarantine. Now let's just take a moment, take a step back, and let's take a look at what we really are facing at the moment. What are the challenges that we're facing? Well, I think primarily 3 things. And the first thing is, biological threat and financial threat. The biological threat is obvious, and what of course makes it difficult to deal with is that it's a threat that we know is there, but we can't see it. So we're taking all these precautions, and we're also dealing with something different than if you're, out there, on the African savannah and you see a lion in the distance. Well, we don't know where the line is here. And second is financial threat. Many people are affected now by the fact that the lockdown, all the steps that have been taken now to deal with it have had a profound impact on the world economy. And in some countries, unemployment is through the roof. And interestingly, depending on which of these threats is more salient for you, which are the ones that are affecting you more, may depend on where you are, what country you come from, what your family's personal circumstances are. In the United States, there are surveys that show that actually right now, more people report being very worried about their financial threats than the fear of getting the virus. Actually, more than 50% of people in the United States are saying that they are very concerned about financial worries, whereas about a third of them say they're very concerned about getting infected. Now, that could be because the social safety net in the United States is not as strong as it is in some other countries, like in Europe. Many European countries are fortunate to have all kinds of financial safety nets in place that can at least help us in the short run. But of course, also, you see now that the governments are trying to weigh these things, the dialogue, when should we end the quarantine and how can we get the economy started? So these are two major threats that we're simultaneously facing. Another thing that we're dealing with is loss. And when I say loss, now, in some of the most unfortunate cases, people who actually lost loved ones, that's of course a terrible thing. But for many of us, most of us who fortunately have not, we're still talking about the loss of our freedoms. We're talking about the loss of daily activities, daily pleasures. And, again, how that affects you depends on what your circumstances are. It can also depend on your age. Like if you're a younger person, you may just want to be able to go, and a lot of your downtime may involve just going and hanging out with your friends and, going into the city and, doing fun things. If you're a guy like me, well, actually, I don't really do anything fun, so I didn't really lose that much. No, actually, that's not true. But in any case, we're all dealing with different kinds of losses, and some of those losses may also have to do with, people being worried about losing their dreams. If your dream is to go to graduate school, or if your dream is to travel somewhere, these are things that you've been looking forward to. You may be worried about those losses as well. And then the third is confinement, being stuck in small spaces. So that affects us a lot. Looking at the same walls 24/7, the lack of stimulation, the lack of freedom again. So these are all challenges that we're facing. And what does that result in? It results in stress, which I'll call corona stress. Now, our brains and our biology have a particular kind of response to stress, particularly chronic stress. And I want to differentiate between acute and chronic stress. Acute stress is an immediate danger. Think about that lion on the African savannah. And that our brains and our bodies have evolved these mechanisms to deal with acute stress. And our brains and our bodies have something called the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This is part of our threat response system, and it prepares us to fight, flight, or freeze, something that I'm sure you've heard about that. And that system works really well when we're under acute threat. Works really, really well. How do we know it works well? Because we as a species have survived, right? So this is proof that this system works well. But the system does not work very well under situations of chronic stress. In chronic stress, our brains keep pumping out these stress hormones like cortisol, and this can have a longer-term detrimental effect on our health and in terms of also our psychological well-being. And in terms of chronic stress, there are a whole variety of common symptoms that you might be familiar with. Feeling more, getting more irritable, getting into fights with people more easily, feeling fatigue, getting tired easily, having trouble concentrating, sleeping problems, changes in appetite or digestion, feeling helpless, feeling a loss of control, which I think a lot of people feel, feeling low self-esteem, feeling like I'm not coping with this situation as well as other people. Why am I getting depressed and I see other people seem just fine? Sometimes a loss of sexual interest, and also just general nervousness and tension. So you may recognize some of these symptoms. If you recognize them, you just remember you are not alone. Many of us are dealing with these kinds of symptoms to some degree or another. Now, where there's stress, there is coping. Okay? We all consciously or deliberately or unconsciously find different ways of coping when we are dealing with conditions of stress. So what I'd like to do is talk about 3 different kinds of coping. And the first kind of coping, which is illustrated in this slide, is what's called in the coping literature task-oriented coping. That means I am going to cope by doing something. Well, it turns out when you look at the research on stress and coping that actually task-oriented coping in general is one of the most successful ways of coping in terms of reducing our stress. So that's interesting to know. However, as is the case for all forms of coping, it also depends on how extreme those forms of coping are. And here on the left, I've got the situation under control. You have somebody who's obsessively cleaning, something that somebody might experience during Corona times. I have to admit, that's me. And the second one on the right, the antenna up, that means hypervigilance, looking around for threats. When is the next threat coming? Where is it coming from? And that you may notice if you are obsessively, let's say, looking at the news to try to find out, what's the latest information about Corona. Now, many of us do that. And if you think about it, staying clean and being alert for threats, well, that's a very reasonable thing to do when there's a pandemic, right? Our bodies are naturally, and our brains are kicking in. This is part of our threat response system. So it makes sense. The problem is that sometimes these active task-oriented attempts to cope go on overdrive. And when they go on overdrive, they can overwhelm us with information. For example, when we're obsessively seeking out information. And so one of the things that I've learned, and I also remember this from years ago when I was living in New York City during the time of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, at a certain point, you gotta limit your information. So one way to do that is just to say, I'm going to give myself, half hour a day, 15 minutes a day at a certain time of the day, and that's when I'm going to get my news. And that's it. Or some people just say, hey, I'm not really going to look at the news at all, and if there's something really important, I'm sure I'll find out about it. Okay, so the point here is that even though in general task-oriented coping is the preferable approach, that anything can go too far. So we're trying to look for solutions that are more moderated, more modulated. Well, okay. Here's another kind of coping. It has to do with avoidance, avoidant coping. That is, avoiding stressful situations. And here are see three examples of avoidant coping. One is using substances or using other addictive behavior. And you might say, why is that avoidant? Well, it's avoidant because I'm using, let's say, alcohol or drugs or whatever it would be to numb my emotions, right? So when I'm using these substances or whatever it would be, and whatever I'm doing, then at that point, my feelings are numb. I'm kind of escaping from my feelings. And so it has, in a way, you could say a beneficial short-term effect. In the long run, of course, it doesn't really change anything. And sometimes it can really lead to feelings afterward of, a lot of shame or regret or whatever it might be. So again, anything in moderation. And I guess here part of the question is, if you see you have already addictive tendencies, that's something obviously you want to keep an eye on more. But I have to admit that I have a little thing for an Aperol spritz around 5 o'clock. And, when the weather's nice, if I just drink one, that's okay. I was going to put the recipe for Aperol spritz on this slideshow, but I just thought it was a bad example for our young people. The slide in the middle with the motorcycle, this is basically risk-taking behavior. And some people might at a certain point be going stir crazy from all of this stuff that is going on, staying inside, and they may just say, screw it. I'm going to go and hang out at the beach. I'm going to go hang out with my friends. And it's essentially avoidance because it's avoiding all those bad feelings we're having by distracting ourselves, by seeking thrills or kicks. And so, you know, what I would say is, if you're seeking thrills or kicks, just be aware of the fact that that can have a dangerous side, right? You may be putting yourself at risk or putting other people at risk. And then finally on the right with that wall, that's basically, I'm just going to block out my feelings. Now, avoidance, again, to a moderate degree, to a flexible degree, has a place. And the question is the avoidance that you're putting into place something that you're doing with conscious, deliberate choice? Are you coming from a healthy place in the way that you're avoiding? Or is it a kind of automatic thing that just takes over and then ends up putting you or other people at risk? A third kind of coping is what's called emotion-focused coping. So coping with emotions, coping by focusing on our emotions. Now, sometimes you can imagine that this would involve things like worrying too much, ruminating, just feeling flooded with all kinds of negative feelings. And yet, interestingly, again, sharing, some degree of being in touch with our emotions can actually be helpful in these circumstances. If we're just blocking out our emotions, we may still be experiencing a lot of stress. And in that case, getting in touch with our feelings and sharing it with people in a constructive way can really help. So again, in terms of, emotion-focused coping, you may have noticed yourself getting more irritable or more, angry at people, feeling lonely or lost, or feeling a sense of loss or grief, or maybe just kind of giving up and just kind of letting your life go and not doing the things you need to do and sitting on the couch and eating chips. So these are all examples of just kind of feeling overwhelmed with the emotion and kind of giving into that in a certain kind of way. So one thing I would like to say about this before I go on is this, that all of us are having, I think, better days and worse days. I have better days and worse days. And that's very challenging. Maybe you're finding you have more worse days than you normally would. You're not alone in this. Now, what I would also say is that I think some people may be suffering in these cases more than others. And if you are really experiencing a lot of feelings of loss or grief, or you're finding you're having trouble controlling your anger, this is a good time to reach out to somebody. I've noticed that the student counseling centers at the university don't seem to be getting more calls, at least from what I've been hearing, than they normally do. And maybe that's because, students out there are doing just fine. They're still busy with their schoolwork. Maybe they're handling things fine. But for people who are struggling right now, I'm really saying to you, this is not the time to be stoical. This is not the time to feel like I should be able to handle it. If something's really bothering you, please just reach out to somebody. Reach out to a friend or family member, or call the student counseling center, or find another professional. Find somebody to talk to about what's going on with you. You don't have to be alone in it. Okay, now for the remainder of the talk, what I'd like to do is just talk briefly about some kinds of strategies that you can use to help you get through these difficult times. The first thing that we're facing as a challenge, and a thing where we can really perhaps take some small steps to help ourselves, is in the area of enhancing self-regulation. What does that mean? It means doing some things to help us develop resiliency, which you see by the tree on the left, the ability to kind of to bend but not break in these situations, to kind of go with the flow a little bit, to keep ourselves in emotional balance, and on the right, to take care of ourselves, to engage in self-care, to nurture ourselves. And there basically are two paths to enhancing self-regulation. One is changing what we do, and the second is changing how we think. Now, let's start with changing what we do. And I want to focus in particular on self-care. Self-care is something that has really been shown to have beneficial effects in times of stress. And whether, so that might be doing sport, it might be just going for a walk in nature, it might be buying a plant at home, or planting a garden. It could be just remembering to breathe. It could be if you practice meditation or learning how to do meditation or yoga. these are all activities, task-oriented, active forms of coping that have been shown to have benefits during times of stress. Now, I have to confess, I'm not a person who's really very good at doing these kinds of things. Some people have a lot more self-discipline than I do. So what I've learned to do over time is develop some strategies that work for somebody like me, somebody who's not that self-disciplined. And the first thing I would say is just start small. Sometimes your big ambitions can get in the way of making small changes, but the small changes can make a big difference, right? So just like we were taking, scale back your expectations now. See if you can start by thinking of even one small thing that you might do differently in the area of self-care. And now second, when you initiate that activity, do it with mindful awareness. What that means is really notice and be in touch with whatever your experience is of doing this activity. And just pay attention to it without judging it. How do you feel when you do the activity? How do you feel after the activity? How is this different from how you normally feel? Now, why is that important? Because our brains and our bodies are giving us feedback, automatic feedback about what's working for us. If you feel good after doing these activities and you allow yourself to take that in and to just enjoy it for a little bit, that's reinforcing, that's positive reinforcement. And that's going to increase the chance that we're engaging in more of these behaviors. And every time you do, you even take a small step, even if you just take a moment and think about, is there something small I might do differently? Or doing something differently? Or bringing mindful awareness to your experience? Give yourself a V for victory. Okay, that's a victory. It's a small victory. We're talking about everyday small victories here, like drops in a bucket that are filling up a bucket. So give yourself that credit, because that's also a way of reinforcing yourself. Now, that has to do with self-regulation in terms of, what are some of the ways in which you can do things to enhance your self-regulation. Another way in which we can regulate ourselves has to do with how we look at situations, how we think about situations. In other words, it's sort of like having a kind of relationship with stress. Most of us, when it comes to stress, we just want to push it away or ignore it or escape from it. But this suggests having a kind of relationship with stress. And research has shown that how you interpret stress, how you appraise stress, that's just a fancy word for interpreting, affects how you feel. And so, for example, let's say you're dealing with one of the threats that we're facing right now, like the biological threat. And you think to yourself, there is a high chance that this virus is going to kill me. If that's how you're thinking, then undoubtedly you're going to experience higher stress, right? That makes sense. It's a kind of catastrophic way of thinking. It's like, my chances are very high that something terrible is going to happen to me, or let's say that somebody that I love, and naturally that's going to increase your stress levels. Now compare that to this. This is a reappraisal, meaning coming up with a different interpretation of the situation. The chances that I will die if I get the virus are actually very low, probably less than 1%. Now, what's very interesting is that the latest data that's coming out suggests that the actual mortality rates from the virus for those who get it are less than 1%. On average, it may be about 0.5%. And for some people who are in the lowest age group, like those age groups, and who don't have any, health complications, probably even less than that. So notice then that if you reappraise the threat, you're going to end up feeling different. It's going to lower your stress level. Now, not only in these situations do we appraise threat, but we also appraise our attempts to cope. We kind of ask ourselves, we pay attention to how we're coping. We say, how am I doing? How am I doing? Well, this is called coping appraisal. How do you interpret your own acts of coping? And sometimes you may say to yourself, I can't handle this situation for one more day. Well, clearly, if you feel that way, if you think that way, it's going to affect your feelings. You're going to have high stress. But if you reappraise the situation, if you change how you think about it, you might say something like, I'm going to take this one day at a time. I'm going to live more in the moment and worry less about the future. And if you can think in that way, it lowers your stress. Okay, so this shows that in terms of changing our emotional regulation, there are basically two paths. One is by doing, and one is sort of changing the way that we're appraising or interpreting the situation. Now, why do some of us tend to have such an overestimate of what the actual threat is to us? Why do some of us think, if I get the virus, I'm going to have a 50% chance of dying, or whatever it would be? Part of it is that the media is full of information now about the virus, about the situation, right? So I'm kind of a news junkie. If you go to any news website, that's all there is now. It's all Corona news. It's not fun. It's not the old fun news we used to have. It's all Corona news. And naturally, because that's all the information that's out there, we tend to misinterpret the danger that's involved in the situation. And yes, there is a danger on a large scale. If we don't do anything about the virus, of course, many people will develop it, and then large numbers could die on it if it gets spread on a massive scale. But actually, the individual threat to you is probably very, very small. Now, another way that we can reappraise stress is by finding meaning in it. And maybe some of you are familiar with this book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, which came out, 60 years ago. Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor. He was an Austrian neurologist, and he actually was doing psychotherapy in the concentration camps. Right? So he was Jewish, he was interned, and he survived. And what he said, if you read his book, is that the people who were able to find some kind of meaning in this dreadful situation, they were the ones who had a greater chance of surviving. So it's kind of a reframing, we call that a reframing in cognitive psychology, changing the way you think about a stressful situation as a kind of adversity challenge. And here are a couple of things that Viktor Frankl said. When we are no longer able to change the situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Okay, that's very powerful. To me, what this means is the ultimate freedom that we have is internal. No matter what the situation, external situation is, we always have internal freedom to change ourselves and how we feel about it and how we deal with it. And he also said that between stimulus and response, there is space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Meaning that when we react to things, we often do it without thinking. We often don't stop and just take a moment of mindful awareness and realize, I have a choice right now about how I'm going to feel, about how I'm going to react, about how I'm going to cope. And that space is freedom. Now, this concept of Frankl's about our internal freedom relates to another important concept in terms of stress and coping, and that's the difference between external and internal locus of control. Some people are more externally oriented in their locus of control. And the question here is, who has the control over my destiny? If you feel kind of automatically that other people have the control of your destiny, you're likely to experience more stress. So for example, if you feel that your behavior is more guided by things like fate or luck, or by other people, or by external circumstances, then you're going to experience likely more stress. That's what the research literature shows. But if your locus of control is internal, then you make a statement like, I control my own destiny. And that means that my behavior is guided by my own personal decisions and my own personal efforts. Now, some people tend to be more externally oriented, some people tend to be more internally oriented. But what this suggests is, and I think it couples very nicely with Viktor Frankl's work, that you could potentially shift your locus of control toward more internal by searching for your inner freedom, right? That if we can try to live more by what Viktor Frankl said, then essentially what that means is, it doesn't mean that the external situation doesn't matter, right? Of course it matters, but it helps us to move our locus of control more internal and therefore have more power and control over how we feel. Now, another area that we can make potential changes is in our connections with other people. And there's a lot of research shows that making connections, and particularly the quality of our connections, can protect us sometimes from stress. Turns out that it doesn't matter how many people we're connected to, that doesn't matter so very much. It's the quality of our connections with others. And there's all kinds of research showing in long-term studies that have followed people throughout their lives that the quality of our relationships is one of the most important long-term contributors to our happiness and to our well-being. Now, part of the quality of our connection is touch. Believe it or not, we don't think about this normally, right? But maybe you're aware now, since you're spending a lot of time behind a computer screen, that you're not really able to touch as many people as you normally would be. So this is what touch looked like in pre-corona times. And this is what touch looks like in corona times, right? We're touching our phones. Now that makes a difference. Why is that? Because things like hugging somebody are good for us. Hugging releases oxytocin, that's the so-called love hormone, and that promotes bonding and trust. There's a lot of research that shows that if you hold somebody's hand, it deactivates stress-related parts of our brain when we anticipate a stressful situation. Now, fascinatingly for our times, even imagining holding somebody's hand deactivates stress and stress-related areas of the brain. So even if the person is not physically present, the feeling of others hugging us or connecting with us or touching somebody on a computer screen or saying, hey, I wish I could be there and give you a hug right now, those kinds of statements and those kinds of acts may actually reduce our stress levels. And, for the people whom you are in touch with and for whom you don't have to practice social distance, maybe you want to consider, giving those people a hug. I know I'm sounding like an American guy from the 60s, but seriously, this really, really makes a difference. And another thing that makes a difference in these times especially is sharing with other people what you're feeling. Share with other people what you're feeling. Because, that's, if that enables us to get the kind of empathic response that we need from other people. As human beings, we need other people's empathy. And these are times when it's not a good idea to just wait for somebody to notice how bad you're feeling. Take a risk. Let somebody know. And I think you'll be surprised to see, how you end up feeling. Now, on the other hand, you may feel like, how much of this closeness can I take? I'm sitting there at home with the same people, I'm going nuts. And in this cartoon, you have the doctor who says, hey, good news, you don't have coronavirus. And the guy says, yeah, but can you still quarantine me from my kids? And for those of us who are feeling a little irritated with our partners, with our children, with our parents, one of the things to remember is the following, that it's always a good idea to try to balance out closeness and distance. We also need autonomy. And for those of you who are younger people who are for the first time living outside your house and enjoying your autonomy, now maybe you're back home with your parents, that relationship can be complicated. And the relationships we have with people who are closest to us can also be complicated ones. So it just means trying to find some kind of balance and to accept the fact for ourselves and for other people that we sometimes need closeness and we sometimes need distance, and just to try to, when there's a mismatch between what our needs are and the needs of the people around us, trying to be as accepting of that as possible. And last, finding meaning. We're almost finished. As Viktor Frankl said, finding meaning can be one of the most helpful things to remember As he said, when we are no longer able to change the situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. And I can tell you in my own life, and I think it's true for a lot of people, that the road we take in life is not always a straight one. And that sometimes the unexpected things push us out of our comfort zone, but they also present opportunities to find resources in ourselves that we didn't know that we had. So you need to be able to use your imagination, symbolized by this picture on the left, to try to think of new possibilities for finding meaning. Be thankful for what you have, and try to learn life lessons. And learning these life lessons don't have to be big things, they can be small things. And part of those life lessons may be that if I can do a small thing to help somebody else, I can feel better myself. We're almost done. One piece of finding meaning is healing our planet, right? So what we may be involved here is like a dry run for what we're going to do about climate change. So if there is a quote silver lining in the situation, it may be that it's made us as humanity more aware of the need to focus on our planet and saving our planet. If you're looking to find your own strengths or develop strengths to help you through this difficult time, you're welcome to download these two questionnaires I developed, these strengths finding questionnaires. These are available for free on our website, and along with a short guide that I created using your strengths in challenging times. This is all for free. So when you're finished here, if you have some time, feel free to go to the website, download the questionnaires, fill them out about yourself, and discover what some of the strengths are that you have. I'd like to end here with the jellyfish. The jellyfish has been around for at least half a billion years, maybe as much as 700 million years. It is one of the very first, species on our planet that's still around today. So the jellyfish must know something about surviving and thriving in difficult times. So I would just like to end on this note. This too shall pass. Focus on the present moment and keep swimming. So thank you very much, and thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, David. The first question is by Amal, and Amal asks, how can we deal with being single and living alone during these times when feelings of fear and loneliness hit hard?
That is really, really tough. Yeah, I mean, dealing with loneliness, first of all, is always difficult. And I can imagine that you want to make some contact with somebody, and if you want to have a close relationship with somebody. Maybe the answer I'm going to give to you here is maybe not going to be the optimal answer for you, but these are not optimal times. So what I would say is there are many ways to counteract your loneliness. And what I would say is try to reach out to other people in your friendship group or in interest groups that you might have, going onto websites of people with common interests. But try to go into it without the expectation for now that, I'm going to find my life partner now, or I'm going to find the person with whom I'm going to have that amazing click. Because I can tell you, at least in my own experience, you can't really control when you're going to find that person, right? That's something that's, not really under our control, unless, you're one of these people who goes to one of these dating websites and obsessively, speed dates with 1,000 people. It's going to be really hard. So what I would say is try to lower your expectations, try to have some confidence that will come, and try to just be open in your day-to-day encounters with people to how you feel. And when you feel you have a click with somebody, dare a little bit to reach out and say, hey, would you like to have a virtual cup of coffee with me? Or, hey, there's something I like, some music, can I share it with you? That would be my advice.
Then there is another question by Astrid. It's on a more positive note. Astrid wonders, how do I manage the fun distractions at home? All the fun things I do at home are more fun than work.
Oh, God. All right. Well, yeah, that's an interesting problem. I'll tell you what I do, and it depends on what your living space is like. One of the things I found years and years ago was that when it comes to doing work, it's very useful to have a separate time and space to do that work. So if you're the kind of person who does all of your schoolwork while you're lying on top of your bed. And that's also where you're having your fun, relaxing time. That's going to present a problem, especially in times like this. So what I would say is, and this is what I do, is find a separate workspace, even if it's a separate, even if you're in a small apartment, even if it's a separate corner of your room, and try to set up a particular time of the day where you're going to do that work. So because the cues around us are very useful in terms of switching us from play mode to work mode. So that would be one piece of advice that I can give you. The other thing I would like to say very quickly about it is build in time for play. Okay, because if you think I've got to get all this work done and I can't get it all done, it's too much, then maybe you just shift over to play mode all the time. So say, okay, no, these are my times for work, but I'm going to build in specific times of play and build in more time for play than you normally would because your body needs it right now. Okay.
Well, in a way, that was part of the answer to the next question.
Yeah.
Someone who asks, has increasing difficulties to let go of work at night and sleep. I enjoy my work and have a good work balance overall, yet sleeping in the same room that I work in all day makes it difficult for my mind to relax and to stop working. How can I increase the cut between work and leisure when the space I'm living in does not allow spatially?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got distracted a little bit by a notification.
Well, so the person is working and sleeping in the same space, one space, and has a difficulty maintaining the work life balance.
Being able to sleep
also.
Okay, well, again, if it's possible to separate that, and maybe it's not in your circumstances, I don't know. But I would say this, that one of the things that can help the most is having a kind of, regular time where you're going to turn off your screens. And that may be really difficult if what you're feeling the need for is also connection. But, one of the things we know about screens is that they keep the brain awake. So what I would say is, if you have something, like a tablet that's, that's set up for reading, like with a reading light, like a Kindle, like I have, or if you have books at home or whatever. These are very old-fashioned kinds of things to do. Or turn off your phone a little earlier and spend an hour watching something fun on Netflix or whatever, and then turn it off. It's very, very hard if, your screens are part of how you soothe yourself and help yourself to go to sleep. But then if you can do that and introduce some new rituals to help yourself go to sleep, for example, making some tea for yourself, or if you have the opportunity to be outdoors, just, going out into the balcony or whatever it is, and, taking in some air, doing some breathing, looking at the stars, so trying to find some new rituals to help cue your mind and to soothe your body so that you can kind of ease your way into sleep.
Thanks.
Sure.
Here is one by Nikolai. When you're ruminating and want to seek help, often a feeling of guilt is involved, the actual tip. So reaching out, telling a friend, seems like a bridge too far in some experience. Are there some cognitive tricks or strategies to become more likely to do this risk-taking behavior?
Yeah, I can really understand that. Well, I think, for you or for other people who are feeling this way, maybe it's good to have a little conversation about the side of yourself that's laying this big guilt trip on you. Like, I know this is going to sound a little, again, like New Age 60s or something, but, take a chair in your room and put the guilty side of yourself on the chair and have a conversation with the side and find out what that side is really feeling so guilty about. What is that? And then you take the side of, the healthy side of yourself, what I call the healthy adult side of you, and speak back to that side. And what I would say is, in terms of how do you speak back to that side, that the way that you can do that also is to embody some self-compassion. I have the right to share my feelings just like everybody else does. I don't have to be so strong. You may be telling me that I have to be so strong, but I have the same human needs as everybody does. Or I should be able to solve my problems myself. Well, that's just a message that I internalized maybe from a long time ago from my upbringing, who knows? But you know what? I know that I need to take good care of myself. So it's what's called self-compassion, having some self-compassion. So try that exercise at home. It's one exercise that you can use that sometimes can be helpful for basically creating some distance from that guilty side and then speaking back to it from your own healthy side with some compassion for yourself.
Okay. I think we've run quite a bit over time. Let's see. There's one more question that continues on the loneliness matter.
Yeah.
And I think that we will do that as the last question. So you've talked a little bit about dealing with loneliness.
Yeah.
And then this person says, so when I'm lonely during quarantine, how do I deal to learn to appreciate it during quarantine and not try to change that by connecting with others?
Mm-hmm.
So he wants to appreciate it more. And what are the strategies to learn how to appreciate it?
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful question. I mean, I think that really has to do with, you know, the encounter that we have with ourselves, right? I mean, you know, if you have a lonely side, you know, we may think that loneliness is something that just has to do with our external circumstances, but actually loneliness, you know, can be a part of ourselves, and that part of ourselves is a part of ourselves, usually from the past, usually from something that we experienced growing up, where we felt not seen or not heard, or we felt deprived of attention or love or interest or whatever all those other human needs are. And then often what happens is as we get older, we tend to reject that side of ourselves. And why is that? Because we feel ashamed of having a lonely side, or, you know, we may feel, you know, embarrassed. Why do other people not feel this way? Well, actually, many people feel this way. So what I would say is try to, if you can, get to know this side of yourself a little bit and embrace it a little bit, that it represents a side of you that missed something when you were growing up. So this can be a chance for you to, you know, give yourself something that you may have missed. And that can be hard because somehow inside we may feel that we don't deserve it. And what I am saying is you do deserve it. The idea that you don't deserve it is just an old feeling from the past. That's all that is. You know, that's a feeling that often goes along with when people have a lonely side. So try to, again, use your healthy side, your healthy adult side, and speak to your lonely child, and, you know, and give your lonely child a kind of virtual hug, you know. So, you know, try to change your relationship if you can with that side of yourself.
Okay, well, I think we're going to finish the webinar right now. I really enjoyed it, and actually, because you can't see the Q&A, but in the Q&A, there's also a lot of appreciation and many thanks for this great webinar.
Really nice.
So,
I'm really glad to hear it.
I would like to thank everybody, and this is the end. I hope you will take a lot of the advice and look at the videos and maybe look at the presentation one more time, and then be safe, be healthy.
Okay, thanks
Bye.
everybody. Bye. Good luck.